first thing we're going to look at is called rules of thirds. So can you just find some of those out? So here we have scenes from the greatest movie ever made. What have I done with my notes? Rule of thirds is very simple. Every filmmaker knows rule of thirds. Every painter and every printmaker should also know rule of thirds. Basically it says that if you've got a confined square to work within, whether that's the side of a mug or whether it's a canvas or whether it's a print, even a drawing or an illustration, is that you divide this up like that, and you're going to put something which is of main interest here and maybe here, probably not there because we go into another rule called the rule of odds. So rule of thirds, let's do it that way. Thirds, rule of odds. Rule of odds says that if you have got an odd number, it looks better. Rule of thirds says if you've got something on a third, it looks better. And the next thing is, and when we get further on, like I teach the other Cert 4 diplomas, I teach them golden triangles and I teach them Fibonacci spirals, and so it gets very complex. And the more complex you go, remember it's always this thing, I say it's a no-brainer way of doing a composition. A lot of artists, successful artists, have no idea about any of this, but they seem to instinctively do it anyway. And so I call it the no-brainer thing, because when you're stuck and you've got to do a bunch of compositions or a series of pictures, working out ideas, you just sketch down the size of your canvas many times on the page, and then you just sort of put thirds on there. And later on you do spirals and other things. So rule of thirds mixed with the rule of odds. So let's just sort of say we have somebody's head is there. That's the figure. So I've got a figure down on that rule of thirds. The landscape is here. So the horizon line is on one of those rule of thirds. Background here, there's a little house, which is again on one of those rule of thirds. And you kind of had odds in one way, but the problem with this, which is what I'm going to talk about next, is becomes unbalanced. If I was doing this, what I would do, probably put a big cloud bank here or a mountain there to balance it. And I'm going to talk about balance in a moment, but let's first look at rule of thirds. So let's have a look at the good, the bad, the ugly. And in the top left there, you've got the ugly taking a swig of whiskey in a church. And what you've got is sort of the light hitting one side of his face down to where the whiskey bottle is. You divide that face in half and it's pretty much on a third. So that is your rule of third. The Jesus at the side there is not on the third, it's out a little bit, and again I want to talk about balance soon. Under him you've got Clint Eastwood there. His hat, his head, his shoulder, well, the arm there, is kind of on a third. Down below there you have a graveyard scene, and the main character is on a third. So you see the man behind the camera here is always looking at trying to divide this up into thirds. Top there you've got him with a noose around his neck. Again, rule of thirds. Interesting, the next one down, the bad guy. As he's turning his face, the light that's hitting his face and his nose is on a third. And the back of his head is probably on a third as well. So that's an extreme close-up, still breaking it down into thirds because all the interesting parts are in thirds. And down below there you have Clint Eastwood aiming a rifle at somebody. Again, he's taking up a third of that panel. Yes?
The first Clint Eastwood, the gun barrel is on the other third as well, so your eye goes there.
True. Yes. Okay, so that's rule of thirds. Now I want to talk about balance. The best way I can describe balance. Do you still have seesaws in playgrounds?
Yeah.
I sort of wonder these days. Back when I was a kid, everything was steel and concrete, which is kind of fun, or wood. So I'm just going to do a little drawing here to demonstrate something here. A cartoon. Man on a seesaw. Okay, on a seesaw. About there. Okay, when I was a little kid, my dad used to take me down to the park and he'd sit on the seesaw with me and play seesaw. But he had to sit right in the centre. I sat down, that's not right. That's right. I had to sit right at the end. So I was little and I had to sit way at the end to make the balance right. So that sort of looks right, doesn't it? The balance is okay there. You can understand that centre of balance with a seesaw. The same way our minds will pick up the same thing when we're looking at an image. So again, look at the guy taking a swig of whiskey in the church. Christ, or the picture of Jesus at the background is light, it's thin, it's not heavy, it's not on a third, it's pushed back to the edge of the frame to try and get that balance. Likewise, the one next to it where he's being hung, here's the main image there, he's right on the third. The scaffolding and stuff on the other side is not as heavy, although in value it is, but it's very sparse, you can see through it, and it's pushed to one end. And also, the guy being hung here on this side here, there's a bit more weight. And so what you've got there is balance. So coming back to this image here, we've got like, a man here, who's quite heavy, a bit of silhouette. So what I've done here is a little house there. If it's on the third, it's not balanced, so that's why I put a big cloud bank there and maybe a mountain behind it. If it's an open plain on a hot day, there's not a cloud in the sky, there's nothing else you can put there, I would then move the house over to here, for the same reason as that. You create a balance. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You find the seesaw is usually a good example for people to understand that. So, that's not on a third, but this is the main thing of interest. That's still in the frame, but it's off to the side to create a balance. Now when people look at that, they think, yeah, that sort of looks right. Whereas, what happens when I put it here? if I put the house here, and there's nothing here, now we have an unbalanced composition. We've got a space here, you sort of feel like the whole thing's going to sort of tilt this way a bit because it's just too heavy on one side. And so it gives you that feeling that it's not quite right. So actually that kind of balances it. The next rule is, well, it's not really a rule, I suppose it's more like an observation, is what I call arrows. When we see an arrow, what do? We tend to look in the direction the arrow's going. So let's go to landscape again. Here's our landscape with a mountain range. And a road. And what I have done there is I've created an arrow to send your eye out of the picture, which is why you'd never do that. So this is the wrong way of doing it. Wrong because the arrow is leading your eye out. You want people to stay within your picture. You want them to, you can actually often make them look or stay within the picture for a while just with arrows. So let's go the right way using an arrow. Another one here. Go to horizon there, you've got a mountain range sort of ending here. Another one here. You've got a road going like that. Where's your eye go? Follows the road up, doesn't it? Because it's an arrow. See, that's an arrow. There's an arrow there, there's an arrow there. Suddenly this has become the all-important part. And so if that's the all-important part, you probably want to stick it on a third. Let's move it over. So here's a person walking down the path. It's there. The trees are around or whatever. There's a little silhouette of somebody walking down the path. And what you can see there is your eye goes straight to it because you've created pathways for your eye to go there. Now you can create pathways all sorts of ways. Let's straighten this up. So it's funny, when you're sort of drawing on a whiteboard, sometimes you sort of don't get the angle right. Take this out of the way. Give you another example. I'll take the wrong one out of the way too. Don't want to do that anymore. So let's think, okay, going to do a composition. So I scribble that down in my journal. Now be a landscape. So pick one of the thirds for the landscape. I'm going to go down the lower third. There's my horizon line. Let's put, what am I going to put here? A windy road there, like that. Which again might lead to a little house. And the little house is kind of on a third. Now I want to do some spectacular clouds. Like this. As clouds do sometimes. And I realise that those clouds, because of perspective, they're probably causing arrows like this. But this cloud here is taking your eye out, so I'm going to have to pop in something. I might pop in a bit of a tree here that slopes around like that. So as your eye gets there, it gets caught there, and sort of comes around there, hits there, and comes back to there. So that can cause your eye to go there, your eye can go there. This becomes important. So now I'm leading people's eye to the third. It all make sense? Say if not. If you get confused at any time, you can ask me a question. Okay, so these are, like I say, at the moment we're just looking at boxes really. We're just looking at square box. When you come to designing stuff for t-shirts or designing tattoos, you still have sort of some of those rules, but you have other rules as well. Now another thing I want to talk about is drama. To get a dramatic composition, to put drama in the composition, you have a diagonal line. So this one here has a diagonal line, and somehow it gives you a sense of drama, like something exciting is happening. And I'll probably have a look at some other examples, give you a bit of drama. Alright, next example's coming out, send it to you that way. Okay, top picture, again from favourite film, Good, Bad, the Ugly. You have a great big heavy building on one side, and that creates a bit of an imbalance, so the wagon wheels and things are as far right as possible to try and attempt to get this balance again. What you also have is an arrow where the wagon wheels and the mountain range all point to that building. And in that scene, the only thing you've got in there moving is a sick dog, which you can just basically see there moving towards the buildings. Again, it was set up as an exciting thing, and also the path in front of the wagon wheels and the top of the mountain coming in like that do also give a bit of a sense of drama. But probably more dramatic is the one below there called Christina's World. Painting by Andrew Wyatt, who's an American artist. He used egg tempera to do a lot of his paintings. And what we have here is very interesting composition, or very interesting balance thing. If you squint at it, the three dark things you see is the lady's head and the two buildings. Rule of odds. Three things look interesting. If there was a fourth thing in there, it probably wouldn't look as interesting. So three things, rule of odds. Okay, what you also have is drama.
Are we allowed to draw on that?
Yes, you're allowed to draw on those. That's yours to do whatever.
I just thought I'd chess.
You have drama in that from her back foot, her body, her head is creating almost a line going there to the house. Gives you the drama, not just because there is a diagonal line there, there's also the emotion behind this too. For those who do not know the story, Andrew Wyatt's sister couldn't walk, and she refused to have a wheelchair, and so she'd crawl around everywhere. And so this is her crawling, and she's crawling towards the house. And she refused to have any help, and so she'd just crawl through the fields or crawl around the house. So there's probably a lot of emotion in this as well, if she's heading towards the house there on the horizon. Putting the house right there on the horizon also gives you a feeling of distance, like it's far away. Which, one would think it's on a hill. It's going to be like that. I'll probably talk more about that when we talk about perspective. Now, what we have is a very heavy house that she's aiming for. Our eye is drawn to that house as quite heavy. We've got her on the other side, which almost balances it out, but she's got just above her head a little barn or something, which helps her balance against that dark, foreboding looking house. You can see how that is a balance. Okay, just always think of the seesaw, how you think of balance. Rightio. We'll get all this theory done before we get into coffee break time, before I set you an assignment. Okay, Wally Wood's 22 panels, it always works. Wally Wood was a comic book artist, very famous in the 1950s for doing, I think it was Weird Tales. He also worked with Will Eisner on a few things. He is a very prolific, very professional artist, very slick, he gets stuff out. If you read what he says here, the 22 panels would always work, or some interesting ways to get some variety into those boring panels where some dumb writer has a bunch of lame characters sitting around talking for page after page. So you imagine you're a comic book writer, a comic book artist, and you give him a script and you think, oh man, what am I going to do with this? And so what he's done is he's created a whole bunch of interesting scenarios. Now, we can use this idea that he has here to mix up and make your own art more interesting. So let's have a look. I may have to translate some of the comic book language for you as well. Okay, first one, big head. Pretty self-explanatory. Instead of just doing head and shoulders, zoomed right in and has done a bit of a close-up on the head. And for those who have seen Good, the Bad, the Ugly, they do that all the time, especially the next one, extreme close-up. Just getting eyes, nose. Creates interest because it's a view that people don't often think about. Okay, next panel, third one, back of head and part of head. And also notice the one in the foreground is more detailed, a bit heavier. Next one is profile and no background. BG stands for background. I actually noticed, that's a comic book term from way back, but I noticed people in the film industry are starting to use that too. You know, let's get a good BG on that. Okay, in the next one, white Ben-Day. So let me just quickly explain what Ben-Day is. Ben-Day is, for America, what we used to call here in Australia electrotone. It is a bunch of dots to make up a grey tone. So just think of it as a light grey tone. These days, the manga comics, they use zip tone, very similar. So white Ben-Day, which means it's almost white, it's very pale grey, and the foreground dark. So that throws all the emphasis on the foreground. Next one, open panel and one large object. One next to that is nearly all black. The man's wearing a black suit and he's in a darkened room. Now, next line. One big object. Could be a hand, a gun, a lamp, a phone. You can see the background again. That figure, you can hardly see it. All the emphasis is on the big object in the front. Next one, full figure, open panel. You sort of think, how can you use this in painting, printmaking? Well, you can just have, or illustration, you have one figure, nothing around it, all just white. It throws emphasis on that figure, which is why illustrators often just have white backgrounds, because it really throws emphasis on whatever you've done. Next one is, Sith, or Sil, is short for silhouette. We have reverse silhouette, black or Ben-Day again. So Ben-Day is the, pass that one back to Reagan. Bendo's that zip tone, electrotone, a whole bunch of series of dots closer together so it's almost black. And the open bottom part of the panel. So this works really well in printmaking. It can work in painting as well, where you've got something almost framed, but then you leave part of that frame out. Works very well in printmaking when you're doing etching and things like that, to break up one part of it so it looks like it's faded out into the page. Next is a small figure and dark around it. Again, the Ben-Day. I think that is to sort of give it a feeling of the small. So middle panel, depth. Try to make it look like there is depth in your drawing. And this is done by having flat planes that are broken into, which can be doors, windows, holes. If you've got a flat surface, it's easy to illustrate a flat surface than to use angles to make it look like you're digging into that. Next one, shot down, cast a shadow. Self-explanatory. The next one's really good, L shape plus silhouette. So the L shape's often really good to use, and think again of balance. So here in this L shape, when you go to L shape, you've got something which is unbalanced. You can sit something on that to stop the L from falling over. So you think of a big L that hasn't got like the foot down there to hold it there in place. It feels like it might fall over. You put something on there. It's like a bookend. It will sort of stay in place. So I'm talking about these as if they're physical objects that can move around, but that's the way we tend to read things. Because we walk around and we have a certain balance to our life, we look around, we will translate that when we look at things. Next one is diagram. If you've seen a technical book of a diagram, it doesn't have much in the way of tones or shading. It tends to be just a line drawing. And sometimes the diagram is an interesting way of working because it can give you a lot more information, because tones and shading can hide information. And speaking of hiding information, down the bottom line, side light or on top. So this is giving you an idea that you don't have to draw all the details. You can have a lot of it in shadow, and therefore the bits that are lit up are kind of interesting. Next one's fun, reflection. Got a figure there just looking down at itself in a reflection. Third one in, frame. Now that could be a door frame, a window frame, and it could be any sort of a frame, because what we're doing is we're drawing a frame and the picture's already framed, so it's a frame within a frame. Kind of interesting. Next one, silhouette, with white or almost grey in the background. So what the cartoonists do, see, these are very rough sketches, and this is all I'm expecting guys to do at this stage. In the background he's just penciled in a bit of a cityscape, but he's going to do it in all very, very pale. He'll probably actually cut the tones in. I like the next one, which is 3-stage. What you've got there is he's used the letter L with a figure there to balance it, and because it's not completely balanced on the other side behind the middle figure are other figures which are heavy to balance up that picture. So you've got 3 stages. The foreground, you've got a very vulnerable looking character in the centre, and then you've got a whole heap of shadowy figures behind that 1, 2, 3 stage. Also putting on a slight angle like that also makes it very unsettling. So it's a very unsettling kind of composition, this particular one. But also drama, because you've got diagonals. Next one, I don't quite know how we'd use this in anything other than telling stories, which is a newspaper or a television set. Then finally contrast. Using a high contrast would create interest. And this last one was taken up by an artist called Frank Miller, who did a series called Sin City, where every frame was high contrast. Right. I'm going to give you going to give you this just before coffee break time. This is your assignment, which you can do today in class. Okay, so what I've done here, what I'm asking you to do, is simply replace the human heads or bodies or whatever with probably what you've been thinking about, which is place. You might want to think of objects in the place for this actual exercise. And I just used a banana because bananas are funny. And so what you've got here is the L-shaped banana. It's an L-shape with a banana silhouette. You've got an extreme close-up banana. You've got a dark foreground. You've got the reverse one with the open bottom. You've got 3-stage. I couldn't pass that one up because it's just too much fun. You've got light at the side or at the top. And, well, in that one I've just done it both to one side because he's giving you options there. You can have the light coming from the top or you can have it coming from the side. You should pick one or the other. And reflection, because it looks good to see a banana contemplating about life. So I've given you that as an example that you can use the 22 panels that work on almost anything, and it helps you rethink your composition other than just depicting something just straight and boring. You want to sort of move it around, mix it up to make it interesting. So...
How many do you have to do? All of them? 22?
No, just pick half a dozen. Not all the 22 work. Because, you probably wouldn't bother with a television or a newspaper, but somebody might. So what you need to do next, it's almost coffee break time too, so I'll tell you what to do, and when we come back from coffee break we can work on this. I'd like you to, first of all, remember yesterday we did some very rough sketches, and I'm talking this level of roughness. I'm not talking about doing anything fine today. I will do a little thing, I'm hoping we've got time. But when you come back from coffee break, we'll get into doing probably some rough rule of thirds balances with some of the things that you did yesterday. You may have just knocked some ideas down, but now I want you to think about the composition. I want you to then, this little assignment I give you, that can be your homework. So you can take that away and think, because when we think about place, you might think of a place and no particular object. So for that one, you probably have to think of objects to add to place, and that will be a nice exercise for you to do at home. Just sit in an armchair and relax and do it. Scribble it down. Don't do it super neat. Well, you can if you want to, but if you're going to be meticulous and neat about things, what happens is you haven't got time to think up all the ideas. You've got an idea, right, screw it as fast as you can, because the next idea is coming. That idea's out of the way, next idea.
Yeah.
Scribble. Got another idea coming. Oh, better scribble that down there. So you have to learn to scribble to get all your ideas down. Otherwise you're there, you're drawing, I've got a good idea, I'll draw that after this, and then you go, and then I've got another good idea, but I'm still on the first one now. What was that idea again? That's why it pays to scribble. Even if it's just a really rough shorthand scribble that you can then come back and refine a little bit. Because if you've got lots of really rough scribbles and then you get stuck, you can always go back to the rough scribbles and just sort of colour them in and just sort of relax a little bit, and then ideas might come. It's always the bane of my existence is I'm doing this great big giant woodcut or something like that, and then I think, I've got an idea, I better scribble this down somewhere. Okay, go have a coffee break, come back at past, and we will work on a few rough ideas for some composition for place. I'll probably